Hi, guys, and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast, where life is story. I am your host, author Dominic Domingo. I failed to say that for a few weeks in a row now, so I thought I'd fit that in. And before I introduce our producer extraordinaire, I want to quickly take a moment to just take stock of our launch. We launched December 1st. It was sort of a softer launch than we had hoped, but officially launched December 1st. So for us, it's been about a week and a half, I think. This will be published later, but as of this moment, I think it's been about a week and a half. I'm not going to speak for Virginia, but I could not be happier with the response, and that includes the hits, meaning the downloads from all over the world. And it's kind of fascinating to analyze the analytics, if that's not redundant, to analyze the stats and kind of see who all is tuning in. So very excited about the response. And frankly, the tone of the podcast. I feel like we've really struck the tone that we envisioned, and hopefully it's inspiring for our listeners. So thank you to everybody who's spreading the word. We really are passionate about this message, which is just the power of story to transform. And I guess that's it on the launch. So here's the part where I introduce our Renaissance woman producer extraordinaire, and this week, Yuletide nail lady, Virginia Grenier.
Yes, thank you. Yep, I have gnomes and I was gonna do a Yule log, but I didn't. But I did do holly, so gnomes and
I
holly.
think a Yule log at that scale would be a little hard to identify.
Yeah,
It's kind of obscure.
yeah, my nailtician really wanted to try, but yeah, we were kind of maybe that's gonna be a little hard. So we
Well, I
lumped
guess
it
if it
with
had
holly.
flames, you'd get it, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Otherwise, it's kind of nondescript, just a
Yeah,
log,
yeah, it looked like a stick on my nail.
right?
So, but
Anyway,
yeah,
well, I've seen them. I've seen pictures of them, so
I know
good on you,
we
mate.
yeah, we've joked about eventually maybe start having my my monthly nails show up on our YouTube channel.
Oh, hey, that's what I forgot to mention. I had wanted to, thank you for that, bro. I don't know if that was intentional, but I
Yes.
wanted to steer everybody to the YouTube channel and just let you know it's got a lot of supplemental content, meaning we can't always fit everything in this format. So, again, trying not to speak for Virginia, but I believe there are speaking engagements from both of us. We've both taught in different arenas. So, workshops, panel discussions, even just editorials. And I'm biting my tongue. I don't want to say rants, but some of them I'm sure come off that way. Little editorials that I post on an as needed basis. So please do tune in for extra inspiration. And actually, at the bottom of the description of this podcast, wherever you're getting your podcasts, you will see a link to the YouTube channel. As a last resort, just Google Language of the Soul on YouTube and you'll find us. Does that sound about right, Virginia?
Yep, that's exactly right. And I haven't gotten my stuff on there, but yes, I am working on some stuff. So, yep.
Promises, promises. But yeah, no, I've seen you're very inspiring to listen to. So, and you're very articulate and eloquent
Thank you.
in the written word. So, yeah, please get that stuff up there.
I know.
Okay, so today's guest, we're very excited about. And in our little pre-interview, I was just saying there's so much we could follow up on. So as usual, I'm sure we're going to fall in love, and I'm going to say, please come on for a part 2 or a part 3. And we'll see what happens here, but very multifaceted individual, just my opinion. And here's the official bio. Please feel free to correct me, Kanah. Kanah Teagyn is a newly published author of 9 children's books and co-founder of Power Book Publishing. Under the pen name of Katie Townsend, Miss Teagyn's children's books teach empowering skills in communication, accountability, and relationships. She introduces parents, teachers, and kids to the wonderful world of words by presenting her stories with challenging words and questions that encourage cognitive processing and build character. You're preaching to the choir here. The character, yeah, I won't go off yet, but we get to mold the future, get our hands in the clay, and I love that. I'm a big fan of epigenetics, so I think we're kindred spirits on that front. The characters in Miss Teagyn's books take the reader on a delightful journey of each hero's quest to find a skill or solve a problem, or appreciate what is of most value to them. Now, as a side note, and this is what I mentioned in the pre-interview, I happen to know you, and again, if I get this wrong, let me know, but I believe you are a complementary energy therapist, a Reiki master, and an NLP master practitioner. And I know energetic therapist, right? There are several specialties under that, but I would love to talk about all of that if we have time. What did I get wrong, Kanah? Welcome, by the way, Kanah Teagyn.
Thank you so much. You you got it all right. It's perfect. Yeah.
Yes, but I believe under energetic healing, you have other practices like the singing bowls that I didn't mention,
Yes.
right?
Yes. There are so many facets of the energy healing work,
Mhm.
and sound, of course, is one of them. And
Mm,
I've music has been a huge part of my life since childhood as well. So I really resonate with that. So
mhm.
yeah, we could talk for hours and hours on any one of that.
That's the danger. Yes, I love it. But I guess to sort of dip a toe in the water, maybe we could start real general. And I would love to ask, with your background, a really general question. In the spirit of the podcast, what do you feel is the role of storytelling in culture? Or, in other words, what is the cultural impact of storytelling? And that's very broad. Storytelling takes so many forms, right?
Right. Yeah, that is a very broad question. Um, in my experience as a child growing up, it was stories that connected me with family and with history, and all of the ways and means of looking at the world and discovering things. And of course, when I was a child, it we didn't have like computers and personal handheld technology devices that we carried around with us and had you know books on audio, and movies to watch just by even while we're just walking down the street and that kind of thing. For me, books were a very important avenue for my discovery, and so
Mhm.
I really
Meaning
grew
like
up.
self discovery or just the world.
Yes, both on both.
Right.
Absolutely. I remember one of the books that had such a huge impact on me. I'm thinking I was 12 years old and it was summertime,
Mm.
so no school. And I was bored to death. And at that time, there was like, we didn't have, hundreds of channels where you could pick anything
Mm.
to watch or anything. So there was nothing to entertain me on
Mm.
TV at that particular midday time. And I went into a room where there was a bookcase, and my mother had kept some old books. And I don't even know where she got this book, but I pulled out this book called The Lamplighter,
Mm.
uh, by Maria Cummins. And it was, published clear back in the 19th century, and very, old language and that kind of thing. And so I worked my way through that book, and it so deeply affected me that as a mother, I searched that book out because
Mm.
I
Mm.
wanted my children to read it. I
Wow.
wanted them to know that story because it inspired me as much as it did
Wow.
as
Yeah,
a child.
I actually found some book finders online and systematically tracked down all of my favorite children's classics from, in my case, they were probably written in the 60s and I got my hands on them in the 70s. But
Yeah.
turn of the century books are a whole nother story. Was this a vintage volume with like the tipped in illustrations? They just don't make them like that anymore.
Right. Yeah, it was. And I lost track of that particular copy of the book.
Mhm.
But later, like I said, I tracked it down. And then as so that was kind of in my maiden stage of womanhood. And then in my mother's stage of womanhood, I'm like totally steeped in mothering and telling stories to my kids to keep them entertained, to teach them
Mm.
moral conduct, and to inspire them in the ways that I felt that I was inspired by hearing the stories from my um, my family members, the older generation, and by reading the books that were available to me. And so I passed that on to my children, and
Beautiful.
for a time I homeschooled my older children, and we had a reading time. We had a full hour of reading time every single day.
Wow, I love that. You know,
And
in public school, they had USSR. Do you happen to remember that acronym?
no.
This was Burbank Public here in California. It was uninterrupted, silent, sustained reading, USSR. I mean,
USSR.
15
Okay.
minutes. And so I reread Lord of the Rings, I think, for the entire 3 years of junior high, but 15 minutes is not enough. Come on.
Yeah, really. It's true. I have in these past several years, I've served as a substitute teacher in several of the public schools and a charter school that are here in my area.
Hmm.
And I, in that experience, I became aware that books and language and storytelling has lost its prominent place in our public education. And it really saddens me. I had an experience where I was teaching, I was asked to specifically tutor two young boys in ninth grade who were failing in ELA, in
Hmm.
English Language Arts.
Hmm.
And so I was tutoring them and I was giving them like little exercises to do. Write this, use this prompt and just give me a paragraph. And I would give them like 2 days to do it and they would never get anything done. And then this mother of one of the boys called up and she was complaining to the special education director, I don't know why you're giving my son extra work to do, but
Oh my
he
God.
just he needs to have you need to be helping him to get caught up in his ELA rather than giving him additional work. and,
Mhm.
and the director said to her, no, you misunderstand, because our job is not to catch him up. Our job is to teach him skills, and
Mhm.
that's what his tutor is doing. And her response was, well, I don't even know why he has to have writing for a skill anyway.
Oh no.
So that
Wow.
was
Wow.
that was a really big wake up call to me that something needs to shift. And
Right. Well, even cursive, cursive is pretty much a thing of the past, right?
right,
That kind of broke my heart alone for all the reasons, right? I'm an educator as well, and just the motor skills aspect, right? Of I just quickly one study, because I got them coming straight out of public school as well. I taught college level, but Art Center more and more was recruiting straight out of high school. So, and
uh-huh.
then I have 22 nieces and nephews. So I saw a lot of changes yeah, we're Italian, a lot of changes over time. And, the moment my students started just taking cell phone pictures of what I took the time to write on the board, right? And they're taking cell phone pictures of it or transcribing directly into their laptops. Now,
Mhm.
in my teaching, I try to hit all the different learning modes, right? I do lecture, demonstration, in class exercise. What else is there? Lecture, demonstration, exercise. Anyway, there's one other, but and then I have a lot of international students too. So repetition is the key to learning. I'll repeat something until I see everybody in the room nod. So I
Mm.
just feel like, I was doing something right over the years, but I decided I'm going to check this out when they're transcribing directly in a laptop instead of actually making eye contact and connecting with me, if that makes sense. And so it confirmed my hunches when I Googled it. You're actually bypassing the process by which we conceptualize, right? When
Yeah.
you take notes, you're breaking down it, whatever the concept is, into a holistic one that you can carry forward and apply in new situations, right? When you transcribe, you're completely bypassing that process. So I'm a big fan of literally writing with your fingers,
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I have often shared with my students because um sometimes they complain, like if their iPads are out of commission or they can't get, or they can't get to a computer, they can't be on a keyboard. I'm just like, take notes.
right?
You have that ability.
You have fingers.
Yes. And so I've often shared with them some statistics that I had learned from a course that I'd taken years and years and years ago. And it was promoting the value of writing. So whenever we're doing an activity, especially something where we're getting information, we're learning something new, we are firing neurons in the brain.
Mhm.
And so when we're typing, we're firing neurons, about 7 to 15,000 neurons per second.
Mhm.
That's pretty great, right?
Mhm.
But if you take a pen or pencil and a paper and physically write with your
Mhm.
hand, it bumps it up to firing about 30,000 neurons per section.
Wow. Mhm.
Um, then here's the real kicker. When we write with pen and paper in cursive,
Mhm.
we fire somewhere between 50 to 75,000 neurons per second.
Right. Right.
So there's a lot of activity going on in the brain when we engage in what has been, lately considered like archaic and undesirable ways
It's
of taking in information.
Yeah, I think it's pretty short-sighted. I want to back up and ask you this, though. I was a little surprised. I understand the parents a little bit short-sightedness, but I sometimes find young young kids today are actually starved for poetic simplicity, if that makes sense. The way I put it is I watched one of the Matrix movies, and I loved the first one, but everything's effects driven and incredibly sophisticated. And I remember seeing one of the Matrix movies and just feeling bombarded. I was just exhausted by the time I walked out. And the very next day, I saw Vietnamese shadow puppetry at Bodhi Tree Bookstore. Right? The
Oh,
most minimal presentation ever, and it rocked my world viscerally. So I'm kind of refreshed when my students are kind of starved for reading or not just the sophisticated storytelling you see in streaming nowadays or the incredibly effects driven cinema which always has a franchise or a toy attached. I'm pleasantly surprised they still not only have an appetite for it but are starved for it.
yeah, it's true. And there are many students who I felt so almost heartbroken for some of my students who had this desire to tell a story. Like they had these
Mm,
ideas in their heads and they wanted to get it out.
mm,
And they wanted to get it out in a really effective way,
mhm,
but they hadn't developed the language that allowed them to do that. And so
mm,
in a lot of cases, that's why they were failing in their English classes and
mhm.
in other areas where they need to be writing. So developing that language is really important. And I believe that begins at a very, very young age with
Well,
story.
don't they say language, sorry to interrupt you, don't language skills peak at 7 or something like that?
Actually, that's
Yeah, it's between 7 and 8 that
Right.
children make the transition from the theta brainwave state to
Exactly, right.
the
The
beta, and
hypnotic
that's where
state.
they stay for the rest of their adult lives.
Yeah, it's tragic.
Yeah.
And then this idea of synaptic pruning came up for me as well when I was reading not your bio, but some of your prompts. Are you aware of that concept?
No, I'm not.
Well, I've been immersed in Deepak Chopra a lot and Bruce Lipton. And
Yeah.
to me, it kind of says it all. It's this idea that I believe 6 months after birth, you have more brain cells than you will ever have. And yet, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And
Right.
this is why we have all these campaigns sing to your child, read to your child, in especially underprivileged communities. Because if you're not using those brain cells that sort of lend themselves or creating those neural circuits, right, that lend themselves to playing the violin, for example, they are snipped. And it's called synaptic pruning. So, it's not
Ah,
just
okay.
language. And I would say, too, like the creative process in general, when you mentioned they can't execute what they're inspired to tell. And of course, Maya Angelou comes up every week in this podcast. There's nothing more excruciating than carrying an untold story inside of you. We
Yeah.
all have a story to tell. But I
Yeah.
just would broaden it and say in the creative process, usually the frustration comes in or the empty canvas syndrome or the blank page syndrome, whatever you want to call it, when you
Mhm.
don't have the technique to back up, right, your inspiration.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I think puts this upcoming generation at a disadvantage is that because from a very early age, they are tuned into very fast moving, short little snips of information in commercials, in, you know, little 15-second highlights,
Right,
and
right.
that kind of thing. They're so tuned to that
Yep.
that there's a lack of perseverance, in their deep part of their character, to be able to really push through the difficult part, the blank page, the writer's block,
Mm-hmm.
the whatever. And yet that's exactly what we need, especially in my experience, because I'm an artist in several different forms, but in the writing area, it's like I really need to persevere in order
Mm-hmm.
to get past those blocks
Mm-hmm.
and be able to like complete a story.
Well, I think too, like understanding the creative process, and then there's many models of it, right? But sometimes if I have students that are really, really just juiced up about the inspiration and then the initial gut level, bleh, expression of it, but then they feel they've lost the alchemy when they start executing. And there might be something that's a little more tedious, like rendering, right? Or fleshing out a
Right.
scene if you're a writer. And I think if you understand its value and that inspiration will transcend even through those, I call them more intellectual, less intuitive stages of the creative process, or the colder ones compared to the warmer ones, right? If you
Yeah.
understand how that works, you just have faith and you get through it, even if it's
Yeah.
not your favorite part. I think that's related, I hope.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That is
But
true.
I think that in the case of writers, like, yeah, if society doesn't support the very tools of your craft, we're kind of screwed. So I love that you're really reintroducing language and the value of it. How did you yourself, how did this journey so far? And you mentioned you got up to the point of your mothering years, right? How did you find your voice as a writer? When did writing become your chosen craft?
Well, I've written things for decades, but it's only been in the last probably 2 years that I've really dived into my really deep identity and desire for writing. And that is largely because now I'm in my crone stage. Like
That's so funny. I
no
was going
no
to
more
ask you.
children at
Right,
home.
right, right. Have you heard the term regency for the crone stage?
I have not heard
I
that.
think it's a proprietary term, but I have a friend who may come on, and her whole thing is she's just trying to change the language around the crone stage, and she calls it regency. You
Oh, I
know,
like that. I
yeah,
like that.
yeah. I'll turn you on to her. Yeah, she may come
Yeah,
on. But
yeah,
what is the crone stage all about for you? It was finding your voice as a writer, in other words, or putting it on the front burner. What does that look like for you?
yeah, because my focus now is not so steeped in the daily needs and interests of my children. Now I'm at this place where I have a lot more freedom with my time. And like I said, I spent the past 7 years serving as a teacher in the public schools. And I still occasionally do a little bit of substitute teaching. But now I'm really, really focused. And I just took this leap of faith at knowing that this is what my next step is. This is the other half of my
Mm,
life.
mhm,
Being able to tell my story, to tell others stories when they share it with me,
mm,
and to teach others how to write their stories, how to get their stories out there, which is why my friend and I started the Power Book Publishing
mm,
company this past year, in our effort to like give people that skill and to encourage them to use this avenue for doing their discovery process, their healing process, their review and their and collecting and gathering and making sense out of their memories. There's so much to be done in that way, and
mhm,
there are so many people that can be blessed by the individual stories that
mhm.
can be shared.
Virginia, I want to invite you in, but I have a quick follow. Yeah, I mean, seriously, I'm sure you have a million things to contribute or ask. But for me, that does lead a little bit to this idea of how do you feel the act of writing serves the individual as catharsis, right? So by extension, yes, we all as patrons can experience the same catharsis when we consume, right? Or
Right.
the patron can also experience the catharsis by extension. But how does it serve the writer, I would ask?
Um, in my experience, I learned this years ago in one of the many healing traditional trainings that I took, that the best way to assuage a child's trauma, suppose they
Mm,
fall down, they skin their knee, they come running to you crying, the best way to get them to get past that hurt
mhm.
and to be in a healing state is to ask them, so tell me what happened, and then
Mhm.
what, and tell me
Mhm.
more about that. So in getting my child to tell their story, it was actually helping them to move past the initial trauma of that impact or that hurt, so that they could be actually in a healing process. I find that's true as I write my stories about whatever trauma I've had, or um, disappointments or heartaches or whatever.
Mhm.
And when I write it down,
Mm.
it starts to make sense
Yep.
in
Yep.
ways that just rolling around in my head doesn't.
Yep.
And
Well, real quick too, though, it's almost like in friendships, right? You don't fix it. Compassion means sitting with the passion, right?
yeah,
So of course, men are notorious for just trying to fix it, but sometimes you just need to listen.
that's so true.
So there's so many implications to that, right? But also just in telling one story, that alone is not necessarily the therapy, but certainly the catharsis and the release.
Yeah.
I think a lot of trauma, including ancestral trauma that certain indigenous cultures might have suffered,
Mm.
they need the opportunity to tell those untold stories. That's where the healing begins. There's so many, right, micro and macro implications of that, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there
Anyway,
definitely are.
Virginia, speak, please.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say, um, and we don't really get into this at the beginning when we were first just kind of warming up for the show, but with my background, obviously being in clinical mental health, when you sit down and you take the time, that's why a lot of like therapists and counselors will talk about like journaling to their
Mm,
patients,
mhm,
or I'll say clients, we shouldn't call them patients, is because what happens is neurologically you kind of work through that rewriting in your brain, so
mhm,
you actually create new neural pathways into moving past what is hurtful and learning how to address it. And so it helps you kind of recover through that, mental health, well-being status. And so it also, because so much stress fills in your body too,
mm,
and I know you know this, Robert, because we talk about this a lot,
mm,
and that's what happens. Like physically, your body starts to heal too, because you start to
mhm,
relieve that stress, because I think that's why a lot of authors, and I want to say, I think it was Hemingway who said, that he would cut open his veins and bleed on the page when he
mm.
wrote. And I mean, that's because that's literally what you're doing. You're pouring your heart, soul, and everything into what you're putting onto that paper if you're really actively writing.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, very true.
Yeah. And Kana, you pretty much said as much. I mean, pretty much said as much that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in reading again your prompts, I think you basically hinted at all of that. But I would say too that we can replay old narratives rather than reframing. That was the word you used, I believe, in your prompt, was reframing narratives, right?
Right.
So that, of course, I'll actually think, of course, creativity is an innate drive, and there's a lot of speculation about why. But I think that when we are, like, a lot of art therapy programs are designed because if you're not creating, you're probably destroying, right? So you can turn that inward as self-destruction or turn it outward as aggression or what have you. But if you have an outlet for your creativity, right, it just saves you from a number of pitfalls, I would think.
Yeah, it does have that effect.
Well, and I want to the other thing too, that at least I have found, at least for myself, and even like being a mother, I find that when my children engage in their own writing or reading story, especially when there's like metaphors or analogies in there, I feel like, that's a transformative tool too, because it helps them provide a framework to understand those complex issues of what's going on around them.
Yeah.
But we learn more through the narrative realm than the didactic, right? So
Mhm.
we're wired for symbology, which means we're wired for metaphor, and storytelling is metaphor.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like taking all those thoughts and ideas that roll around in our heads and putting them out in front of us, like we can get now out there in front of me,
Mm,
with the storytelling, with the journaling, with the writing. When it's in front of me, then I can see it more.
mhm.
I can actually make make connections with what has been, confined to my thoughts, and now see it applying in what I see and do and experience in the outer world. So
Yep.
there's so much value in it.
Absolutely. And I hopefully you can speak to this as well. But this is how I hold a conversation in my own writing. I absolutely know my themes. I've said this before, Virginia, right? I may know what I'm out to illustrate. It's never didactic. I'm never trying to beat anyone over the head, but I kind of know the good, the bad, and the ugly of my thematic content. But of course, there's always this unexamined cathartic function that's happening. And yes, we are figuring shit out for our own lives.
Yeah.
So everything I've ever written, there inevitably comes a point where I'm like, yeah, I've got my 3x5 cards, but I actually don't know the outcome exactly and all of its nuances. And to me, I hit a point where it's like, it feels like a lot of responsibility writing policy for my life moving forward. But that's exactly what we're doing. And sometimes it's making, lemonade of lemons, or sometimes it's creating a little order out of the chaos, right? But it always, if you haven't probably engaged in the creative process 100%, if you don't transform as a result of having gone through it.
Yeah. I have been so appreciative of you mentioned indigenous cultures and the heart the harm that has been experienced with so many of
Mm,
our indigenous family members. And I had the privilege in my process of raising children to raise 4 Native American children.
mm,
And so I had both a contrast of, my own children that I read to, and I, had a lot of interaction with, and I taught them, and gave them space and encouragement to be creative and that kind of thing. And then seeing how they processed um, and learned in their schooling compared to my native children, and how much at a disadvantage they were because they didn't have as much of that nurturing going on because of the situation that they had
mm,
come from.
mhm,
And so that gave me a really good awareness um of how valuable it is at every single age and stage of our development to have that connection with the stories that tell who we are
mhm,
and what we're about on this planet.
mm.
And yet in my native children's history, like in their ancestral history,
Mm.
storytelling was huge. It
Of
was
course,
all
of
about it.
course,
That's how they passed on everything in their culture, was through
of
storytelling.
course. Do you mind
So
my asking which tribes?
my children are Cheyenne, and let's see, 3/4 Cheyenne and Cherokee, and then
Wow. Well,
half Cheyenne and half um oh my goodness, how come I can't remember her dad's tribe. Anyway, so yes, mostly Cheyenne.
speaking of ancestral trauma, the Cherokee, right? The Cherokee carry a lot of really heavy ancestral trauma.
Yeah.
So let me just make sure I understand. In you were drawing a comparison, right, between your other children and those with a Native American ancestry. Were they not in touch with the traditions? Were they not afforded that connection with their
They
culture?
they were largely disconnected from it
Hmm.
because of their their family situation
Right, right.
where they weren't um, in this particular family, their traditions were lost in the addictions and the violence that was
Mm.
so much more prominent. And
Of course, yeah.
so they did not have that nurturing that, was, part of their earlier cultural traditions. And I went to the library and checked out every single book I could find on the Cheyenne traditions, and I learned to sing a Cheyenne lullaby from one of these books, so that I
Mm,
could sing them a Cheyenne lullaby when they would when I would tuck them in at night. And
beautiful.
and then, and to get them to re-engage, like we started getting involved in um some Title IX groups and in the public schools, and with other organizations that kept us abreast of, when and where the powwows were. I would sew their
Mm,
regalia for their dances and everything, and that's how I was able to like pass that on to them. But I recognized that I was a substitute teacher, and
mm,
I could only teach them so much. There came a point in their lives where their family members were able to come back into their lives and have a better influence. And one of the mothers was um, was able to like start speaking in Cheyenne to her little grandkids that she
mm,
was, having at that time. So I feel like I held a place. I was a placeholder,
mm,
for them to have some um, stability and experience and support in their growing up years, so
mm.
that then as adults, when they started having their children, they could seek out those parts of their culture that I couldn't give them, and that
Right.
they could find from their other family members.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Surrogacy is, it takes a village, right? We're all
Mm.
Totally.
interconnected. Interconnectivity is the word. But I just am kind of fascinated. Did you find the lullaby resonated, even if they weren't really in touch with their roots? Was there sort of cellular memory at work, if that makes sense? The reason I ask is, I mentioned I have a lot of international students, and to me, it was kind of fascinating how they, you can call it their voice, their sense of aesthetics, their unique thumbprint. It's not style, it's voice, right? I could look at the
Right.
crit rail and that indefinable thumbprint that is their soul, and you could kind of look at the crit rail and say, oh, that person's had their heart broken, that one not yet, but their work's going to explode when they have nothing to lose. But the fascinating thing was, even if they were trying to mimic a more Western style to land at Disney, DreamWorks, PDI, Pixar, the cultural stuff just came out. There's
Mm,
almost no way around it. So
yeah.
I just was wondering if you did this lullaby resonate with them, or even when they're, I think you said the grandmother was finally speaking Cheyenne to them, did they immediately embrace it, or was it completely foreign to them?
Um, they went through stages just like any kid does, sometimes right around, you know, 10 to 15, they're kind of resistant and don't tell me what to do. And that's stuff that none of my friends are doing in school or anything. So they kind of resist it a little bit. But then it's when they get a little bit older that they start really craving that, and they want to know more of their
Yes.
roots and where they come from, and how to connect with that. So
Yeah.
that's where the storytelling that their mothers and their grandparents were able to bring in at that point was so valuable.
Beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm also curious too, because like where I live, we have the Paiutes in my general location, and I actually had a sister-in-law, um, even though my brother and her are now divorced, that she was raised. So her mother was Paiute, but her father was Caucasian, and so she was actually raised by her grandparents in not on the reservation, but her father's parents. So she grew up more in the inner city and stuff. And I know for her, she's been spending a lot of time in her now 30s trying to reconnect with that history. And I know like a lot with, the Native Americans, most of their traditions and story is orally passed down.
Right.
Hmm.
What's been your experience kind of learning about how to help your children, connect with that? Because as you said, when you have family members, and there was the same situation with my sister-in-law, her mother battled alcoholism. So because that
Mhm.
she didn't get that oral storytelling of the traditions and the culture.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why my children were in the situation that they were, because addictions and abuse and neglect and violence, it has become so prominent in a lot of the tribes, the Native American tribes, way of life, since the Europeans, arrival on the scene. And so that's my experience with my kids was, like I said, they had moments where they resisted it because they just wanted to fit in.
Right,
Mm,
right.
And that's a stage that every child goes through. And and then they have that time where they start thinking beyond their own immediate needs in the moment, and they start looking towards how am I creating or contributing to my future or the
Mhm.
future of my next generation. And that's when they really start reaching out for that connection. And when my children were at that place, um, they they sought out their mother, and it was part of the
Mhm.
reason that she was able to, like, change her lifestyle and get into a position where she could have a more healthy relationship with them, and
Mhm.
start passing on those traditions. And now, Victoria, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
mhm,
Well, I'm going to take that opportunity as a transition to, again, steering it back to the spirit of the podcast. I think young adulthood, or kind of going out into the world and going to college, that is often when you, right, reframe your narratives. You rethink
Mhm.
not only socialization, but your upbringing, right, your nuclear families, worldviews and value systems and
Yeah.
norms and mores, and you kind of find your peeps. So, as an example, I grew up with there was literally two African American girls at my junior high, and I think four at my high school. And a dear friend, whom I'm still friends with, was Jamaican. But of course, Afro American studies in college was the first time she really got in touch with her roots. And so I just think that's true of all of us. We're really on fire in terms of reframing our narratives, right? And then we hopefully come home and embrace our roots a little bit later, a few decades later. I think we kind of balance all of that. But I guess the transition here is, I think you hinted, you didn't use the word epigenetics, but you seem invested in, without putting words in your mouth, our potential for reframing the future or writing our own story, is how I put it, for the future, by recognizing, you know what I mean, how fertile of a ground it is. Our young people, if we can change their thought forms and paradigms, or at least inspire them to rethink certain thought forms and paradigms that actually are limiting, I think you did use that word, right? Empowering or limiting, then that's how we get our hands in the clay. I think there's a lot of conversations going on right now about revisionist history, aspirational thinking in education. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how can we have more of an effect on future generations in terms of the march toward human potential, as opposed to some of the limiting beliefs, like, I don't know, patriarchy, colonialism, imperialism, all the things that are got us in this mess? How can we create our future through education, and specifically language, since that's your emphasis?
Yeah.
That is a very broad question. I realize that.
um, that is absolutely an essential part of my mission, and what I have come to this realization is the second half of my life contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And And
Was there a moment that, sorry, so sorry, but was there like a lightning strike? What, or was it just empty nest syndrome? What really put that on the front burner for you?
it's been a process.
Mm.
It wasn't like a sudden, uh, realization, but it has been a
The clouds
process.
didn't
And
part.
yes, the empty nest thing has definitely contributed to that
Right, right.
because I'm not one that can just when people would say, well, don't you want to just retire and take it easy? And I'm just like, what? That would
Right.
not be living to me.
Absolutely. Don't let the
So,
rocking chair get you.
right. No interest. And in fact, I think oh yes, I do have a rocking chair. I was gonna say I don't have a
Oh,
rocking chair
no.
anywhere in my house. I used that when I was rocking babies, but
That,
not
I guess, stormy weather came to mind, right? Rocking
right.
chair will get me.
Right. Yeah, so this concept that we can reframe our story is so important in order for
Mm,
us to grow and evolve to the place where we desire to be.
mm.
Mm.
We are hardwired for growth. I mean, there's no
Ah,
getting around it. We cannot
thank you.
pretend that there is any place in our lives that we can coast. It's
Well,
just impossible.
you said the magic words, because whether you take sort of an empirical stance, right, or a more spiritual one, we are hardwired to be the best version of ourselves, right? Epigenetics wants that because it only contributes to our proliferation and our propagation. We
Right,
are wired to overcome our ancestral trauma, or at least be a cog in that machine, right?
right. Absolutely. Yeah. And the storytelling that we do and the writing that we do is is the most consistent, I feel.
Mm.
It's the most consistent and um, rooted kind of way of getting in connection with that.
Well, I would say we learn more in the narrative realm than the didactic, period.
Yeah.
That's why, and thank God, I do say amen for militant activists. I say amen to, do you know what I mean? Those
Yeah.
who are actually really inspired on a grassroots level to make a difference in their community. And it takes all kinds. But I would say, let's not downplay the importance of story, right? There's a million, and I know Ayn Rand is problematic and controversial, but she would say we hold up a mirror at any given time to society, and we reflect back our morals, ethics, principles, policies, and it's crucial to our growth. The evolution of our ideas is as important as that of our biology,
Yeah.
or we would have been extinct a long time ago, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And to quote another guest, you can't balk at this. Don Hahn, the producer of Lion King, kind of said, I worked with him for 11 years, and he granted me an interview, very very sweet. And he said, it's one of the most important jobs out there. It's as simple as that. Storytelling is one of the most important jobs out there right now, especially at a moment like this with so much divisiveness.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's a lot to be accomplished um, in being able to pass that appreciation on for upcoming generations, because
Mm,
like you've said, it's um, we would die out if we didn't have this desire to be better, to grow, to learn more. I mean, all of our advancements in you know the technological world, in the industrial, in the um, in our relationships, in our global connections,
mhm.
it's all inspired because of this innate desire that we have to learn and to grow, to
Yep.
be better than we
But
were
it's
last.
almost like it's getting compartmentalized in a way, and maybe that is the impetus to reintegrate and synthesize some of the ways, right? The disparate ways in which we've evolved. I
Right.
think the writer's strike and the actor's strike was a really great opportunity to look and go, what is the human touch in the creative process? How do we define the human touch in storytelling, right? And I won't preach on AI. You can't stop the march of technology,
No,
whether
no, no.
you like it or not. So we're going to have to figure this shit out. But, but I do wonder, I mean, it leads me to a question, actually. Even just again in animation, there's a lot of talk about not AI necessarily, but what happened to the archival value of the physical artwork of 2D animation? It has zero currency right now. Will there be a comeback or not? And so I wonder. I'm brokenhearted when read. I joke like, why did I decide to become a writer when nobody reads? Like, what? What? I love the smell of a book. I love the tactility of turning the page. I love bookstores. I know why I want it to survive. Do you know what I mean? If storytelling still exists in streaming format or in cinema or all the ways that cultural ADD permits it to, right, survive,
Mhm.
what about literature itself? What about books? What's the value of what's the value of books?
Well, here's my thought on this. I like you, I'm not going to dismiss the value of AI, and I use AI
Mhm.
for some of my for parts of my writing, and I found it to be useful as a tool.
Tool. Thank you.
That's what it
Right.
is.
Right.
It's a tool. It's not the answer. It's not the creator.
Right. Of
It's a
course.
tool that the creator uses. And when we get clear about that,
Mm,
then we can recognize that all of this really is about that. Our storytelling is in a very um, in a very basic and deep way. It is how it's the tool that we use to get us from where we are now to where we want to be
mm,
tomorrow, or
beautiful.
10 years from now.
Mhm.
And it's the same with books, and we cannot let go of the physical page, the turning of the leaf, of
Mhm.
the book. Uh, we can't let go of that and relegate it to something, you know out of the into the past, where we no longer have a connection with it. It's really important in this day and age with our technology
Mhm.
to also be connected with the roots of where storytelling has come from,
Mhm.
where it has been stored, and how it has been conveyed in the physical books, from pen on paper, and from from the actual mouth um, of the hero that's telling the
Mhm.
story.
Mhm.
We have to make that connection without losing the value of that foundation that we're coming from. If we try to erase that foundation, the technology will only take us so far. We
Mhm.
have to make the connections with both, and see the value and teach the value, so that it's an ongoing thing for our upcoming generations to really connect with.
Beautiful. Yeah, you mentioned the word crone. I do feel like when I catch myself, I guess I'm a dinosaur. When I lament the passage of something that I value in Facebook, for example, I get comments like "Get off my lawn," or when I was a child, I walked uphill both ways to school with blocks of soap for shoes, and I'm like, no, actually, there are teachable moments where we can embrace any wisdom we've acquired while on the planet, right? And so I guess what I'm getting is I remember the first time a student said, I tried to say, hey, well, in terms of like your film history, I'm still playing catch up. Like I still watch old film noirs just to play catch up. And I think I cited a film, and the answer was, well, that's not relevant. This word relevant is really big right now. That's not relevant. That was over 5 minutes ago. And so more than ever, and I call it the hubris of youth, right?
Right.
You don't know what you don't know. So you don't know the legacy that got us where we are today. And that, you might as well have a book burning at that point.
Exactly. So true.
So we are here to teach younger generations the value of the past, right?
Yeah. Well, and like I was saying, really maintain a connection with those things that seem outdated. Like, um, I remember my grandparents telling how they were so surprised when their neighbor got an automobile, because
Wow.
that's where they came from. They they lived in an age when that wasn't just a given like it
Right,
is
right.
today. And and so we look back at them, we think, oh, how quaint, how cute, a
Mhm.
horse and buggy kind of thing. Um, but there's a lot of value in connecting with, especially in our language and in storytelling. It's so important that we connect with those old methods and the original, the foundation of where this has come from, so that we can pass it on.
Yeah,
And
and I think that is why the thrust of this podcast is the cultural impact of storytelling, right?
right.
Is its role in society is pretty specific. And the stakes do get heightened when you have, like I said, during these strikes, you have creative executives saying, y'all are a dime a dozen, you screenwriters. We can cobble together scripts using AI. Well, I call that content, but not redemptive storytelling with value to the collective, right? You can,
Mhm.
and I'm sorry, I've done this rant before, but like if you just provide the parameters, yes, AI is a tool, it's a very helpful tool. But if you're providing the parameters and you're just throwing in a bunch of old, tired tropes that actually may be limiting and not empowering, right? Then what you get is, sure, a script, but not a story. So to me, the
Right.
human element is the inspiration that demands those parameters. And that inspiration, just my opinion, comes from the universe itself. Inspiration is what's needed in our dialectic. It's
Yes.
demanded by the universe. So that's a little wacky. I don't expect you to follow that, but
No, I totally agree with that.
mm,
And there is no way that AI can produce the voice of an individual.
mhm. Yeah, it's not there yet with humor. That is for sure. They say, oh, you can program spontaneity. You can program, new responses to novel stimuli. And I'm like, okay, but let's agree the humor is not there yet. There's so
Right.
much nuance
Yes.
available. And nobody's. There's a little metaphor here. I remember being in a department store once, and there was an alarm going off. Those alarms, the little plastic things on the clothing.
Yeah.
I guess somebody had tried to walk out, and nobody in the department store noticed this incessant beeping. And granted, I'm an artist. I have heightened senses. I can't tune anything out. Damn it. And I was like, nobody is responding to this beeping. And so I just have developed this opinion like we have a low level hum all the time that people are just not in the habit of being aware of. So I don't know. I just, what the metaphor there is, but I think people are like crabs in the boiling water and they're just accepting all this vacuous content, right, without necessarily placing value on the redemptive part. And the intersection between art and commerce is as old as time. These creative executives that are saying, we don't need you writers, their short-sightedness is what we need to combat because the public doesn't, do you know what I mean? We can't expect their tastes to be elevated. I think we got to keep fighting for this.
Right.
That
We
sounded very elitist. I do think the public there will be a pendulum swing. Do you know what I mean? And they'll be tired of the vacuous content. That's what I hope. And there will be a re-embracing of everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, my wish and desire is that we don't get to a really depraved state before we have to realize that we want the pendulum to swing back. Let's have some influence on swinging it a little earlier than that.
yeah, especially with climate change. Anyway, Virginia,
Yes.
before we have to find another rock to live on, right?
Well, so I know we've been kind of focusing a little bit on education and obviously stories impact on society and stuff, but story also, you know, affects us in how we look at spirituality and stuff. And I know that's something that you actually have written a book talking about, some of that and Eastern medicine and how it can help us, be better people. Can you speak to that a little bit and how language and story has influenced kind of that pathway for
Mm.
you?
That is absolutely an essential part of my whole spiritual path. I grew up in a very um, strictly observed Christian home in the Mormon culture, and had very specific ideas and ideals taught to me, and then as I grew older and in my process of raising children, and especially children who are of a very different background and culture, I had the opportunity to really look at what is my spiritual path. And that book that I told you about that I discovered at 12 years old,
Mm.
um, had a really significant um, influence on the beginning of that discovery, and that seeking for. Yeah, I get what my parents believe, and I get what they're saying, and I get what that culture believes and embraces, and I feel like there's also more.
Mhm.
And I remember so many times being taught in my Sunday school lessons and things that in these latter days, the days of when Jesus or the Christed one is supposed to return and have and reign over the earth. Um, I remember hearing that it would be in those days that all truth would come together in one great whole.
Mm.
And I heard that many, many, many times.
Mm.
And as I discovered things in my mothering stages and raising my children, I realized that there was a lot to be gained from listening to and reading from the very ancient beliefs and practices of many different uh, spiritual disciplines, as well as those that are like present today, and we have so much weaving and connecting with ancient wisdom and traditions and current um, religious or spiritual teachings, as well as what as well as the opposition. Like
Mm.
there's some people who believe that there's nothing beyond this. It's like we were born, we live, we die, that's it.
Mm.
Mhm.
Well,
I I have a belief that is not just
mm.
it's more of it's a more extended path in my way of believing, and in the connections that I've gotten from the stories that are told and the writings that I've immersed in with all these different spiritual aspects, it's very important to have that. I wouldn't have any ability to read anything that Lao Tzu wrote
Mm.
if it weren't for the writing. I would
Yeah.
have I would have no concept of that.
Let me see if this makes sense. I actually made a connection in my book. I'm not going to remember now. But like, actually, most literary criticism is rooted in liturgy, right? So our understanding of parable, of metaphor,
Yes.
comes from the church, and actually education, academia, and theology used to be hand in hand, for very good reason. It's diverged. But anyway, I think our entire understanding, and if you study someone like Joseph Campbell and comparative religion, you do see the connection between, yes, campfire stories through myth, legend, folktale, right, through religion. And I just think, we've had a few guests that really wanted to throw out that baby with the bathwater. And the way I put it is there's a good reason for the disillusionment, right? More people have left the institutionalized religion of their upbringing this generation than ever before. Okay, there have been a few bloodbaths, few molestations. I get the
Yeah.
disillusionment, but you
Yeah.
don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So the guests I'm referring to just wanted to reject anything that reeked of patriarchy or, those things were used to oppress people. Actually, in my view, the templates we're talking about that so beautifully encapsulate the human condition are where our interconnectivity lies. Yes, right. Indigenous cultures should tell their unique stories, but I'm more and more interested in the universal. And that's, I would argue, the spiritual journey that we do all share that's encapsulated in these templates we're talking about. Does that
Hey,
make a little bit of sense?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I wanted to add to that too. I know like it doesn't matter what your, spiritual belief is. I mean, I feel like all spiritual narratives pretty much all emphasize the same
Yep.
themes as an empathy, compassion, understanding toward others. I mean, I know pretty much I come from the same thing. I come from a Catholic Church of God and LDS background, was raised in the LDS church, known as the Mormon church. But I know for me, over the last 5 years, I've been on my own spiritual journey. And I know it's because of those stories that I was
Mm,
taught in my youth that have helped me kind of explore my own beliefs and my own assumptions to things, and to kind of like think more deeply about what, spiritual, what spiritually matters to me, and where my perspective kind of goes
mhm.
on those different concepts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I agree that the tenets of all the major, like, let's stop splitting hairs, right? The divisiveness is imaginary. If you really look at the major
Yeah.
tenets of the major religion, we're saying the same thing, just using different terminology to a point,
Yes.
But I would argue within Judeo-Christian, Western European culture, Jung has a great book, Christ as the Symbol of the Self. It is the
Yeah.
perfect encapsulation, whether people want to admit it or not, right? We do. I mean, I used to think in my 20s, oh, the worst thing you can do is assume we're all the same, right? As a gay man being held to certain standards, I felt like, no, 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 we're not all the same, actually. Nowadays, I am so interested in our shared, right, humanity and what interconnects us. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think storytelling is the place for that. And if you think of the story of Christ alone as a parable for the human condition, there's a lot to learn there. I think the Greek myths got it all right. I do.
Yeah.
There's so much to glean there.
Well, and this is something that I discovered in my spiritual path, is that, and it has been the basis for one of the courses that I teach is empowerment for teens and
Mm,
empowerment for parenting, and it's based on 8 principles that I have discovered in my trainings and in my scriptural study from the canonized scriptures, as well as the Torah and
mhm.
and the Quran, and
Mm.
all of these other ways that I have found um, these
Truth.
very basic principles exist in every single one
Hmm.
of those
I
records
would be interested. Can you lay a couple of them out, or is that too much to dive into?
for
The shared tenets, the shared principles, the shared
oh,
truth.
well, I can give you the list of the 8 that I teach.
Sure, I would love that if you don't mind. We could
Yes,
pay you. I don't want to. I don't want you to squander all your secrets for free.
No, no, no. This is good. When I teach the course, of course, there's activities and there's little assignments
Right,
and there's
right,
a lot to it. So
right, right.
I can give you a synopsis with no problem at all. So the very first principle is thought, because everything begins from the realm of thought. And the next is perception, and how we perceive ourselves and our world has a lot to do with what we do with it and how we interact in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next is choice and accountability. That's the third principle. And then closely related to that is cause and effect. And when we recognize that every choice
Mm-hmm.
sets in motion a cause
Mm-hmm.
and activates the effect or gives us the effect, then in that space, in that little circle of movement, then we have this incredibly important place of accountability, and it's like the center of these principles. And in fact, I've been writing a book on point of power, healing our relationship with accountability, because accountability is where we find our empowerment. And then the next principle is health and healing, and how all of these principles work together, and it affects our bodies and our minds. And we are at the level of health and healing based on how well we practice these other principles. And then the next one is where am I? Health and healing and rhythm and harmony. All of these principles have a rhythm and work together harmoniously based on the symphony that the universe has already
Wow.
written for it.
Beautiful.
And when we recognize how these all link together, then we can be in that space where we truly have appreciation and we can express gratitude. And in that, that was a principle I completely skipped over. After health and healing is abundance and gratitude. And recognizing that everything, the universe always provides abundantly. So if we focus on negative things, it provides negative abundantly.
Of course.
And if we focus on positive things, it provides abundantly the positive things. So that's how we recognize that we really are the creators of our life and our life experiences, and how we interpret them and use those experiences in our growth and learning. And then there's the rhythm and harmony and how it all works together. And the final principle is celebration. It is so important that we celebrate. We do not completely embody any of these principles unless we are willing and able to celebrate, to recognize, oh yes, that's what I did. And we can celebrate our mistakes as well as our
It's like saying amen.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yes,
That's what's missing. We're so conditioned to think that, we gotta flog ourselves all the time, right? That a spiritual life means one of scarcity and sacrifice. And it's like, I love that embraces humanism, and celebrating our divinity.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to
Really
say
beautiful.
too, with my studies, when I recently took a 8 dimensions of wellness class, and in that course, it actually, everything you're just talking about hits literally on that, about having that well-rounded balance of wellness within within our dimensions of holistic harmony, from both the spiritual, mental, and physical, aspects of our lives. So no,
My
that's
take,
awesome.
sorry to interrupt you. My take from hearing that is, and this is not to diminish any one school of thought or any one way of looking, right? Like, my whole premise of my book is that if you understand the role of semantics and perspective and flux, there's very little that's definitive that can be disproven, right? And so back to what we were saying about the shared tenets, in that list, I'm sorry, those are the laws of manifestation. So people like to dismiss, oh, that's new age. It's called mentalism. It was revived around the turn of the century, right? But it's all these principles that get conveniently dismissed or lumped into one section of the bookstore as new age actually are exactly what you just described, the mechanics of manifestation.
Yes.
And so I also heard in there too, there's a book called The Kabbalion. Have you ever read that? Not Kabbalah, but The Kabbalion.
I have not read it.
I think it's, again, mentalism around the turn of the century was a revival of an Hermetic text from Hermes way back. And, but it has this whole section about the rhythm you described. It's kind of like riding out the pendulum swings. If you understand there are energetic shifts, right? When you walk out of like today, when my coffee overflowed in my microwave and I might as well have stubbed my toe the minute I walked out the door, you can just sort of ride those out, if that makes sense. When the energetic forces are in your favor, you ride that momentum and the pendulum swings even further. So I like that. Everything's seasonal, everything's rhythmic, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a magical moment with about a year ago when one of the schools that I'd been teaching in allowed me to teach these principles in a specialized class for certain students who were struggling. And
Mm,
here's what the really amazing thing is. Of course, I had to be very conscious about making sure that there was no religious connotation or
right, right,
anything. You
right.
know,
It's
I had to
tricky.
keep it
Was this
very.
public school?
Yes, it
Oh my
well,
God.
yeah, a public
Wow.
Hats
charter
off to
school,
you.
a charter school. So yeah, they allowed me this magical moment where I taught these principles to this certain group of kids.
Mm,
And here's the feedback I got from their teachers.
mm.
Um, of of probably, I think I had 28 kids that came at different times, and they all were different ages from 6th grade to 12th grade.
Mhm.
And when I checked with their teachers, how's this student doing? The feedback was very consistent
Had
that
their grades skyrocketed.
they're not skyrocketed, but there was a dramatic improvement in
Wow.
their attitude
Of
and
course.
how they showed up and how they were able to complete tasks that they were given.
Mhm.
And most of the time, teachers were giving me feedback that, wow, this is so amazing. We need you to teach this to all of our kids.
Amazing. Well, it should, right? How is it not part of public education? That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
But accountability, I love the idea that I think Eckhart Tolle says, you know, you may not have chose all your circumstances and conditions, but it's pretty helpful to act as if you did. Or to, I say, pray, I pray that things would come to pass just as they are. So most human suffering is the product of wishing things were other than what they are.
Yeah.
So, you know, accountability sounds a little, I don't know, like your mom shaking her finger at you a little bit, but I like this idea that, yeah, your choices create your, and what you put your attention on grows, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think my experience as I've worked with clients in healing process for the past 25 years, and like I said, you know, teaching in schools and everything, people have a resistance to accountability, which is why I started writing that book about
Mhm.
our point of power, because we have this idea that, like you were describing, it's somebody shaking their finger at you and saying you messed up, you
Mhm.
know, you're bad or something like that, and that we've associated that with accountability
Right.
rather than the power of awareness and acceptance that
Suffers.
accountability
Yep.
really is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And when we get that part of us, you know, healed, when we heal that relationship with accountability.
Well, we need to have compassion for ourselves, right? So when you, it's not a, it's cause and effect. There's no judgment in cause and effect, right? So if you
Right.
can look at your life choices, and we're all just doing the best with the circumstances that we've got, right? There's an argument to be made that everything's a projection, right? If you study quantum mechanics, it's like everything in your universe is a creation, if not a projection. So I just think accountability is where it's at, but there's also compassion for oneself. It's a tricky balance, right? Maintaining self-love while taking responsibility,
Yeah.
especially for the unpleasant stuff. Hey, I think I noticed in your one of your prompts, if not your bio, you mentioned the 7 spiritual laws of success. No, what was it? Yeah, wasn't it Dan Millman? I feel like you cited the
Uh,
7 spiritual laws of success. No, that's Deepak Chopra. Are
no,
you a fan of Dan Millman?
that's actually Covey. Oh yeah, that's Deepak Chopra. Um,
Right. But it
I'm sorry.
was, yeah, the natural. Anyway, I feel like it was Dan Millman, and I thought we had a shared influence there. I'll have to find it.
Okay.
You didn't
Uh,
mention Chopra's book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success.
I didn't.
Okay.
I don't recall mentioning that one.
And Dan Millman doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, I know Dan. I
Oh
have
yeah,
Dan
well, it was
Hendricks.
that one where he talks about like the cat. There's a sage that's a cat, and he talks about like the egret standing on one leg and how we can all learn something from that. He talks about how, a duck will just get in a fight with another duck, but they don't spend time lamenting it or carrying
Right.
around chronic anxiety about it. They just shake the water droplets off and go about their day.
Right.
It was drawing these spiritual lessons from nature. It was a really
Yeah.
beautiful book.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes.
Well,
I totally appreciate the lessons that nature gives us.
so we're at toward the top of our show. So I know that earlier we were talking and you mentioned that you had prepared an excerpt from one of your books to share with us.
Yes, I do. It's actually from the presentation that I give to homeschoolers and teachers.
Okay.
So this tells in my voice how important storytelling and being the listener as well as the teller of the story is to us. There is a vastly important purpose in telling and hearing our stories. The importance is not in how dramatic or simple they are. It makes no difference to the grand scheme of life and to humanity that our stories are concisely tucked into a nutshell or embellished to grandiose production for our audience. What matters is that we tell them. In telling them, we must be listeners as well. We have to listen to the presenter who came before us on the stage, as well as the one who comes after us. In the hearing and the telling, we gain clarity about our experiences. The stories drill deep into our bones and saturate our cells with memory. With every story told and heard, there is a shift in our physiology and our minds. Our cells soak up our memories, recall our successes and failures, and inspire us to be more of our authentic glories in tandem with our grungies. Because our highs and lows walk side by side in our histories and make us who we are and affect what we do. Every time the story is told and retold, heard and remembered, we can take a step back and see a little bigger picture that replaces the original narrower view. We can see who we really are and understand the expansive possibilities of what we might become. We can witness the whole of us, and in the wholeness of our witness, we can love us fully, freely, fiercely. And in that place of love, we are healed.
Woohoo!
Yeah, love that.
Wow, so inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
Really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's inspiring, but it's also very loaded. The words you choose are just poetic enough to invite, right? Like all the different, I don't know, implications of every phrase was so loaded. I hope that's good feedback. Yeah, I
Yes,
think it's
yes,
so
thank you.
broad. Like you could apply it to so many things, but really inspirational, beautiful.
Wonderful.
And tell us the title of that book.
That's not a book.
I'm
I was
sorry.
telling Victoria that it's part of my presentation
Right.
that I give
You
to
did say that.
homeschoolers and teachers and
Right.
in
Wow,
that
that
effort
is
to
they probably
inspire people.
absolutely. They probably never heard anything like that in charter schools and public schools. Wow.
They need to hear more of that is what they need to
Absolutely.
to
I mean, I am surprised that my sister is a creativity expert and it's becoming more the norm in business contexts and even academia. But there needs to be more of, creativity in general, but also I don't know, some of what we've been talking about today. Right?
Yeah.
The power we all contain intrinsically to manifest or create our own realities.
Right.
Without, again, coming off as a cult or a religion. That's always the trick. People are so touchy. Those parents.
Right.
Anyway, thank you for sharing that. Is there a book that you want our listeners to check out in terms of, what we've been talking about today?
Right now, I have my little children's books. The picture books are up on Amazon, and they're under my pen name, which is Katie Townsend. And also under the publishing company of Power Book Publishing, which I mentioned earlier.
Well, next time we have you on, I would love to hear how you built a publishing company, seemingly from the ground up, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a learning curve there. We would love to hear about that. We have a
Yeah.
lot of indie author listeners, I'm guessing.
Okay, yeah, that would be wonderful. I'd love to share that.
Okay, we'll do a part 2. And Virginia, those links to the books will be in the bio. Is that right?
Yes, I always add it with your bio at the bottom of the podcast description, and the links will be there as well.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you so much. I mean, that excerpt was so inspirational. It's a great note to end this on.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to meet you and visit with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on. Take care, everyone.
Right.
And to our listeners, as always, remember, life is story. And to mix metaphors, we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write our own song. See you next time.